I'm here today to talk about the work of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. That's a mouthful, but it's an important committee. Senator Ted Kennedy, who served for many years as chairman of the HELP Committee, as we call it, once said that the HELP Committee had 30% of the jurisdiction of this Senate. And if you think about it, health, education, labor, and pensions, the work that we do touches the lives of virtually every American. During the last 2 years, I had the privilege of being the ranking Republican on the committee. The senator from Iowa, Tom Harkin, was the chairman. I think most people would agree we have as ideologically diverse a committee as any committee in the Senate, but we worked very well together. Where we disagreed, which was often, we simply stated our piece and we voted. But we looked for opportunities to agree, and we produced 24 bills from the committee that became law. I'm not sure any other committee can say that. And I look forward to the same sort of relationship with the senator from Washington, Senator Murray. She's an experienced legislator, cares deeply about education and health and labor and pensions, and has proven she knows how to get a result. We're operating today under a budget agreement that she helped negotiate with Paul Ryan in the House. So I'm hopeful that Senator Murray and I can work together in the same spirit Senator Harkin and I did. And I've now visited with almost all members of the committee, Democrats and Republicans, and I feel confident that we can do that. Here are my goals for the next 2 years. Now, I have the privilege of being chairman of the committee. As I understand the job of the majority and the job of the chairman, it is to set the agenda and then give all members of the committee a full chance to participate in the result of that agenda. And that means in this Congress that in our hearings and before our hearings, we'll have a full chance to discuss and amend. That once we report a bill, that it'll come to this floor, and Senator McConnell has said there'll be an opportunity for a robust amendment process. Then, Mr. Chairman, I would hope that our bill would go to conference with the House of Representatives, and there we would discuss further. And since I hope to get a result on most of these pieces of legislation that will come up, I know that there'll have to be 60 votes to move out of the Senate, 60 votes to go to conference, and 60 votes to pass a bill in the end. That takes working with all senators here, including those on the other side. I also know, Mr. President, that if we want it to be a law, it takes a presidential signature, and that president today is President Obama. And on the major issues that we hope to address, we hope to work with him, and we hope to gain his signature. So we'll set the agenda. That's our job. But we'll also listen and be open and inclusive and give every member of our committee and every member of the Senate to weigh in on the issues that touch virtually every American. The 3 areas that I will focus on as chairman, that I hope the committee will be number 1, fix No Child Left Behind. I'll talk about that more in just a moment, but that work is 8 years overdue. We've been working on it 6 years. The law has become unworkable, states are struggling, and as a result, we need to act. The Secretary of Education gave a fine speech yesterday saying we needed to act. I agree with him, and that will be the first thing we need to do. My hope would be that we can finish our work in the first couple of months of this year. Second, reauthorize higher education. I would like to deregulate higher education. Maybe a more accurate way to say that is to simplify and make more effective the piles of regulations that we now impose on our 6,000 colleges and universities. If we have something that we want to regulate, we should take the 600 pages and narrow it down to 2. One of the committee members is Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts. When she was at the Consumer Bureau, she said she'd like to have a 1-page mortgage application. May have ended up being 2 or 3 pages, but I thought that was a pretty good idea because a multi-page mortgage application doesn't really serve the purpose of informing the consumer of anything. If you can say it in 1 or 2 pages, well, maybe the consumer will learn something. And I think we could do the same with higher education. And there's substantial area for bipartisan agreement there. Just last week, Senator Bennett of Colorado, Senator Booker of New Jersey, Senator King of Maine, Senator Isaacson and Burr of North Carolina and Georgia, and I introduced legislation that would make it simpler and easier for students to go to higher education, to fill out the complicated, dreaded FAFSA, the 108 question application form that 20 million American families fill out every year. The president talked about this on his visit to Tennessee on Friday. He thinks it's too long. He'd like to see it become law. I think higher education is an area that we can work together on and work with the president on. And then the third thing I would like to do is to restructure and reform the Food and Drug Administration. Now, there's a great opportunity working with the House and with the president to take a good look at the FDA, to take a good look at the modern world of medicines, personalized medicines, and to say, what do we need to do to make it easier to get treatments, medical devices, and cures through the FDA process safely, but quickly and effectively, so they can help people. This sort of work literally would affect every single American. So with fixing No Child Left Behind, we would affect 50 million school children and millions of teachers and 100,000 public schools. With reauthorizing the Higher Education Act and making its regulations simpler and more effective, we'd affect 6,000 institutions of all kinds across this country. And if we were really able to take a look at the FDA, the House and the Senate and the President working together, we could affect the lives of every American and Americans and people all over the world by the kind of treatments and devices and cures that we bring to market. So that's the agenda that I hope for. Of course, we'll also want to deal with the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. On this side of the aisle, we'd like to repeal it, and I'm sure there'll be that vote. But that's not all I hope that we do. I hope, in the words of the senator from Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, we move as rapidly and as responsibly as we can to repair the damage that Obamacare has done. And one example of that would be to redefine part-time work from 30 hours to 40 hours. That would give about 2.5 million low-wage employees in America a pretty big pay raise when they go from 27 hours or 28 hours to 37 or 38 hours, which is what they would be able to do if part-time work were defined, as it is for everything else, as 40 hours. We'll have our first hearing on that on a bipartisan bill in the Help Committee on next Thursday, a week from Thursday. It's a bill introduced by Senators Collins and Murkowski and Donnelly and Senator Manchin, a bipartisan bill. Our committee has a great interest in this bill. The technical jurisdiction is with the Finance Committee, but by agreement with the Finance Committee, we'll have this hearing, and then we'll send to the Finance Committee our opinions, and it'll be up to the Finance Committee how to report the bill or whether to report it or what version of it to report. It helps that, at least on the Republican side of the aisle, 6 of the members of the Finance Committee are also members of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Now, Mr. President, let me talk about the first item on the Help Committee agenda, and that is the plan to fix No Child Left Behind. I see the senator from Washington here on the floor today. She'll be speaking after I do. I look forward to hearing her comments. I said before she came how much I look forward to working with her, that she's experienced, that she's a leader, she's direct, and she knows how to get results. And I hope that we're able to do that with everything we work on, including No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind was passed in 2001, the year before I became a senator. It's become unworkable because Congress and the president failed to reauthorize and amend the law when it expired over 7 years ago. Under the terms of the law, the original provisions continue, but that's what's made it unworkable. Those original provisions, continuing today, if strictly applied, would label as a failing school almost every one of our 100,000 public schools. That would be clearly an unintended result of the bipartisan senators and House members and President Bush who first worked on No Child Left Behind. So to avoid that unintended result, the United States Secretary of Education has granted waivers from the law's provisions to 42 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. This has created a second unintended result because in exchange for the waiver, the Secretary has told those states what their academic standards should be, what accountability systems they should use to set performance standards, How many and what tests shall be used to measure the progress of students? How to evaluate teachers and how to identify and intervene in low-performing schools. The department has become, in effect, a national school board. Now, we've been working pretty hard over the last 6 years to try to fix the problems with No Child Left Behind. In each of the last 2 Congresses, the Senate Help Committee, our committee, held numerous hearings. I think the number of hearings we've held over the last 6 years on No Child Left Behind and K-12 education totals 24. Twice we've reported legislation from the committee to the Senate floor. In the Congress before last, it was a bill with a Democratic majority on the committee that I didn't particularly like, but Senator Isaacson, Senator Enzi, and I all voted for it so that we could move it to the floor, continue to work on it on the floor, hopefully in committee, and then do our job and replace the law. But it didn't come to the floor. Then in the last session of Congress, more hearings, and we reported the bill again. So I think what is left to do on this bill is to start, now that we're open for business, sit down with a specific proposal, and it's our responsibility to lay out at least a staff working draft to work from, consult with all the members of the committee, focus on it, and see if we can get a bipartisan result in the committee. I hope very much that we can do that. As a result, beginning tonight, on the website, well, already I've distributed to all the committee members, Republicans and Democrats, copies of the chairman's working draft. I emphasize those words, not the chairman's bill. It's not a Republican bill. It is the chairman's working draft, because you have to have some place to start. And it is the job of the majority and the chairman to start the discussion. So this is where I'd like to start it. What we would like to do is to meet virtually every day for the next rest of this week and next week with staff members of the various senators on the committee, take each bill by section, get feedback on the bill, and begin the process of seeing where we agree and where we disagree. We began this process 6 years ago with Secretary Duncan, with leaders in the House and the Senate of both sides. Chairman George Miller gave us some pretty good advice at the time. He said, let's pass a lean bill to fix No Child Left Behind. We found over the last 4 years that there are not many problems with the bill, maybe 8 or 9. On 4 or 5, for example, the goal, which is unrealistic today, we probably can agree pretty quickly. So we're really talking about differences of opinion we have on 4 or 5 major areas, and they're real differences of opinion. I hope we can bridge them in the committee, and I'm going to do my best to do that. And I'm willing to spend all the time we need to over the next several days or weeks to do that. But if we can't, then we should vote, and then we should go to the floor, and we know, as I said, that we have to get 60 votes to get off the floor. If we go to conference, then we have to get the president's opinion, and we send him a bill that gets a result. So I look forward to the process. My goal is to start it with this working draft and with our first hearings, which would be a week from tomorrow, on tests and accountability. That's a subject every member of the committee is interested in. The question is, are there too many tests? And who should be in charge of the tests? Who should decide what the tests should be? We need to answer some questions before we make a decision, and in the draft working paper that I've circulated, I actually have options there, the current law and a version of the law that gives more flexibility to the states. The plan that I'm suggesting here is to set realistic goals, keep the best portions of No Child Left Behind, and restore to states and communities the responsibility to decide whether schools and teachers are succeeding or failing. The Help Committee's draft working paper relies on and respects the 30 years of work by governors and chief state school officers to develop higher standards, better tests, stronger accountability systems, fair and effective teacher evaluation and principal evaluation programs that will allow parents and communities to know how children in our country's public schools are performing. If I might say one other thing, Mr. Chairman, this is more personal. I've watched this development of goals, standards, tests, teacher evaluation for a long period of time. I was governor of Tennessee in 1983 when Secretary Terrell Bell in the Reagan administration issued the report called A Nation at Risk. It said that if a foreign country had created our schools in the condition the way they were, we'd consider it an act of war. At the same time, governors all over the country were becoming energized by that, knowing that while the federal government has some involvement in elementary and secondary education, it only pays for about 8 or 9, 10% of the bill, and that most Americans feel like they should be in charge of their local schools, not Washington. So governors began to work together. In 1985 and 6, all the governors spent an entire year on better schools. First time in the history of the Governors Association that had happened. I was chairman of the National Governors Association that year. The governor of Arkansas, Bill Clinton, was the vice chairman. Then in 1989, the first President Bush held a national meeting of governors and set national education goals. And then in 1991-92, President Bush, the first President Bush, announced America 2000 to help move toward those goals. I was the education secretary by then, and the important difference was that those goals were goals from the states, that the high standards that were talked about were voluntary standards adopted by states working together, that the teacher evaluation systems talking about were adopted by states like Tennessee, which in 1984 became the first state to pay teachers more for teaching well, not being told to do it from Washington, but doing it ourselves. And other states began to model in the same way. Governors then began to work together on higher standards, on accountability systems, as I said, on teacher evaluation, and that took us to the 1990s. And then it took us to President Bush II. Governor Bush, who had been a strong education governor in Texas, brought many of his ideas to Washington. And here we had the idea of reporting of annual tests to determine how students are doing in every school and reporting in a disaggregated form how they were doing, so no child would be left behind. Then later on, in President Obama's time, Race to the Top came along, giving states incentives to adopt certain standards and certain tests and certain provisions. And then No Child Left Behind became unworkable, and Secretary Duncan said, well, I'll give you a waiver so you can operate your schools under No Child Left Behind, but in addition to that, if I give you a waiver, I'm going to tell you what your academic standards should be and what your accountability system should be. And I'm going to tell you how to evaluate teachers and how to deal with low-performing schools. That's why I believe that we've had a trend toward a national school board. And we need to reverse that trend toward a national school board and put the responsibilities back with state and local communities. There's a difference of opinion about what that balance should be. I hope we can seek that balance in the committee. I know of no way to do that except to start. We've been working on it 6 years. Multiple hearings, reported a bill twice. 20 of the members of the 22-member committee were members last year when we had hearings and reported the bill. So I think what we need to do is roll up our sleeves, go to work, identify the 7 or 8 issues, pay attention to each other's points of view, and see if we can fix No Child Left Behind. So I look forward to that process. As I said, the chairman's staff working draft, already distributed to committee members today, will be on the website tonight so that people can see it. We solicit that feedback. We'll work with staff over the next week or two, and the senators will talk, and we'll see if in the next few weeks we can turn that working draft into a bipartisan bill. And if we can, we'll go to committee and we'll have amendments and we'll see if we can get a bipartisan result. And if we can, we'll go to the floor and we'll work on it even more. And if we can't, we'll still go to the floor. And we know we'll have to get a bipartisan result to get off the floor. That's the way the Senate's supposed to work. I'm ready to get started. And I've talked to almost all my colleagues on the committee, and I believe they are as well. So I thank the chairman. I yield the floor. Mr. President, if the senator from... I would like to ask unanimous consent to include, following my remarks, a list of the 9 the 9 problems that the chairman's draft identifies as the problems that we should be working on in trying to fix No Child Left Behind. These problems generally come from the discussions we've had for the last 6 years with the House of Representatives, with the Secretary of Education. Not necessarily the solutions, but the problems are agreed upon problems and should help us move along more rapidly. I ask consent to include that following my remarks. Thank you.